Yeah, good afternoon.
Afternoon, Tower.
My name is Galekhutle. We are here for a series of political education broadcasts that are being run by AZAPO Limpopo. And our role today, or our task today, is basically to look at the issue of crisis in education as a result of the pandemic we find ourselves in, particularly during this lockdown period. So we will be getting into a conversation relating to that issue and see how best we can be able to get into that and deal with the issue at hand. Like I said, Galekhutle is my name. Comrade Gallens, you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Thabo Gallens in Mohale, Limpopo, a person that has been involved for very many years in education. And this conversation, hopefully, will bring a lot to light and see how best we as an organization can look at possible solutions.
Okay. Look, basically, this is where we find ourselves, that this pandemic affected almost every sector of life in our country, probably in many other countries, but specifically we want to concentrate, or I'm concentrating on issues as faced with in our country. And while I'm saying many other sectors are affected, education appears to be the worst hit by the pandemic. Schools tried to open over the past few months, but because of infections here and there, they kept on opening and closing, opening and closing. And that basically would say nothing effective was taking place in schools during that period, and it basically appears to be a wasted year. What I want us to look into, TP, is that this the result of the pandemic as we are faced with, or there are other deep lying reasons why we find ourselves in this situation?
Mata, for us to do justice to this topic, it will be remiss of us to discuss what the pandemic has done without looking at what the government has done in the past or had not do in the past that has been accentuated by the pandemic itself. Had we done enough, had we done enough of what we were supposed to do as a country, I'm sure things would have been far different than it is now. We look at the education system. Unfortunately, this particular one, we cannot do without comparing it to the past and what we have done in education for the past 26 years. I don't think that you see, the pandemic has actually unclothed the emperor. It has left him naked. Look at what has been happening over the past 26 years. Do you think we had a plan that could have put us in a better position than we are had we executed it effectively, had we planned with a lot of things in mind to upgrade, to do justice to the Black community and make sure that education could definitely see them through whatever other challenges, be it poverty, be it unemployment. Education was key. But I think we need to just look at what stage does the pandemic find us and how that would have impacted on the situation in which we find ourselves in.
Okay, it's interesting that you are mentioning issues that can be referred to as underlying causes of the situation that we find ourselves in. You see, when this pandemic started, scientists agreed on a number of things. But one of the things that they agreed on is that this situation becomes worse when you have underlying health issues. They used comorbidities as a word to describe that if there are comorbidities that you are suffering from, you are most likely to be worse affected by the pandemic as we find ourselves in. And it looks like our education is suffering from those types of comorbidities. And probably that's the reason why we find ourselves where we are. You look at how things are run in education, the issue of recruitment, the issue of planning, like you indicated, the type of teacher that we have, promotion policies, and the like. Are these the factors that you are referring to when you say the government did not, or the government is not, or fails to get very deep in ensuring that education becomes functional? Look, one of the biggest experiences that I have noticed during this period is that as we are dealing with basic issues relating to the pandemic, the hygiene issues and the like, Black communities have to queue outside for food parcels and for many other things. And it brings me to what Julius Nyerere said at one stage, saying that education must not, or is not going to take you out of poverty. You must use education to fight poverty. And probably our failure is not as a result of only where we are. It's as a result, it's more deep, it's more the result of how we have been handling issues in education from since we came into control of the country. And that exposed us, particularly the Black communities. Does this mean there is very little hope that we will be able to recover and probably save this academic year and be able to run with education going forward?
Excuse me. Let us try to get deeper into those comorbidities that we have referred to. The kind of teacher we have today, the kind of training that they are given, the kind of attitude that teachers have towards the learners, these have definitely exposed us to a very great extent. I remember back then, we had in one school an educator who was very caring, who gave a humane face to the Black child at school. A kind of teacher that would, instead of going to write his examinations, one year he decided that he's going to let that pass because his learners were not very well prepared for the examinations. And he felt that he needed to continue teaching them. The very same teacher, when he was admitted in hospital, he asked the doctors to release him because in 3 weeks' time, his students were going to be writing exams and he wanted to be there with them. He wanted to give them as much help as he could. Do we have that kind of teacher today? No. And the reason is because we look at political affiliations. We don't look at what kind of intervention this person is going to come up with. I'll give you an example of an educator that came into one school. This guy refused to, when the school had poor results, the staff planned that this is what we're going to do to improve on our results, to improve on the quality of the results of the learners. This gentleman was not prepared to do that. But because of his political affiliation, he was promoted to become a deputy principal at that school where he was refusing to participate. How do you expect the other educators to assist him? This is what the government has allowed by bringing in people that belong to a particular ideology and not necessarily to people that are committed. That gentleman today is he's heading a school. That school was producing very good results. It has gone down by more than 25%, but there will be no accountability. Why is this happening? I think it is because we have a government that pushes a lot of welfareism, that wants to be looked up to as people who are going to take us from the quagmire, and they are the only saviors because of votes. This government is not doing enough to assist these learners. I had a parent calling me the other day saying, come and see the situation at this particular school. There are no teachers who are amongst learners to ensure that they've got their masks on. There are no teachers amongst the learners to do what we call a ground duty, to look after the learners and tell them and remind them to mind the social distance. So as a result, these schools, very many of them, will continue to have these problems because we do not have teachers that care. And I wonder, during your time as an educator and as a head of an institution, how would you have resolved these problems? Thabo.
Okay, basically, what you are saying is the situation is worsened by the way we handle issues relating to education, particularly the teacher behavior. You also indicated or mentioned an issue relating to promotions, to positions. I guess you are aware of the study that was conducted over the past few years relating to the influence that a particular labor movement in teaching was influencing the issue or issues relating to promotions and the like. Now, I'm bringing this up to try and compare it with the situation where education would have been functional. In a functional setup, promotions and appointments would be based on ability and on the willingness of a teacher to go an extra mile. But trying to get from what you were indicating is that we unfortunately are in a setup whereby promotions are done on the basis of who you are, not on the basis of what you can produce, what you can deal with. And that, unfortunately, if it develops along those lines, it damages the kind of product that we want to see emerging out of education, that we want to see being the product that the country would be happy with. But maybe something else says the crisis as we find ourselves in, it benefits the intentions of those who are in power. You see, we have a situation whereby in many instances, liberation movements would try to cling on to power and come with different strategies to ensure that they do not shift. Don't you think that the product that we are producing in our schools as a result of the system currently is a product that will assist in keeping the party in power, because they will have a particular pattern of voting? They will continue to vote in a manner more acceptable to the status quo. So we find ourselves probably in a situation whereby the type of individual we are building is an individual that is far from being self-reliant. It's an individual that will help to sustain and to keep those that are in power in power. And those also who are in the know would say the pandemic as it happened in the country badly exposed the inequalities in our country. So if I'm right, and the idea is to produce a voting fodder for the government, how are we going to be able to sustain that if we continue doing this? Or will this be sustained through our push for private education in the country? How do we intend to make sure that the country progresses when we produce a learner that is unable to self-sustain and to independently exist?
There has to be a plan, a follow-up on what we do and we do not do. You see, the education system that we should be looking up to, it's number one, we have already mentioned, that is very caring, that is very humane, put the human face to everything that we do, and not have a situation where if a person is sinking, we take out our cell phones and videograph that instead of coming up with plans of saving that person. That is the situation that we have. A situation where we look at people that are not caring at all. Imagine a whole leader or leaders of a particular movement. When food is made available for learners, it is some of these very educators who would steal that food that is meant for the poor. Same with the food parcels during this pandemic. Where did it land to? We heard that there was some 500 billion rand that was budgeted. Then we went back to go and loan some more. But I think it is because we do not have a plan. We are, I want to believe, seriously led. You remember, Thabo, we once had a discussion about a policy that allowed the white managers in schools to get up to 100,000 rands per quarter in addition to their salaries. And our black principals were not afforded that opportunity. I can't remember, I'm not sure if you'll remember that one, which will also bring us to this position of the one white principal that we spoke about, who stays at the school's cottage. The government is not doing anything, it's not paying rent. He is getting this money and he goes about with the school's credit card, buys whatever he's got to, and there are no repercussions. And in fact, it happens with all of them. But that does not surprise me. Let us look at the schools that are meant for blacks. We had to be forced by a court ruling that we should cease to provide the kind of the pediatrics, where we lost some of the young souls because of that. That shows that the government is not caring. Does it surprise you that even now we have said, let the public schools read generally the poor schools, stop going to school, but we allow the rich schools to go on. Are we not perpetuating the them and us, the rich and the poor mentality? Now it is all of these together where we find that the rural schools don't even have water. We had to start supplying water because of the pandemic. Is it the pandemic that caused us not to have water in some of these schools, or is it because of poor governance? That is what I'm saying. Yes, the pandemic has exacerbated the rot that has always been there in our educational system. How do you say we are led when you have a government saying we are acting on expert advice, that it is better for the learners, for the children to be at school than to be at home? But then they get forced by labor movements to close the schools. And the next thing, our president cannot even take questions so that he can explain to us, the followers, why he decided that would be the best idea. But let's take it a little further. Tomorrow, the grade 12s are going back to school. Does it mean the pandemic was only a great threat during the past week, that they went to go and stay at home and now they go back? Is this as a result of the pandemic, or is it because of the kind of governance and leadership that we are being provided with? What would be your comment there?
Basically, what you are indicating is that we have very little control, or the government is having very little control in the running of education in the country. And if that is the case, then it means that they have willingly or unknowingly outsourced control to somewhere else where education is being run. Look, earlier on, you indicated that we have the situation that is basically not running well because of the type of teacher. This morning when I went through the Sunday Times, there's a school in Limpopo, I think it's Dendron Secondary School. And I was attracted to that article. There's a photograph of the staff showing some jubilation outside the school premises with some few parents and the head of the school. And as I went through the article, the indication was that the school has basically, or the teachers in that school have basically completed the syllabi for grade 12. They are having about 276 grade 12. Now, I wanted to check how is it possible that a school in Limpopo, which is mostly known to be rural, can be able to achieve that. And as I read, I realized that there is that element that you alluded to earlier on, the element of a caring teacher, that the teachers have removed some of these learners from their homes because there's no space to study and the like, and the school does not have hostels, so they basically are staying with those learners in their homes. So the teacher in that school basically is not only doing work during the day, they are also supervising and ensuring that learners are able to complete their homework accordingly and so on. And earlier, when schools reopened, the indication was that the grade 12, although will be allowed back to school, they will not be sitting for a half-year examination. But that school says they did sit for full-fledged papers across all the learning areas or across all the subjects, and their learners did extremely well. does this mean then the situation in the country is not running because of two factors? One, the government that has surrendered control, and two, the teacher who looks at going to school as an ordinary work or job practice, whereby he just looks at coming in and knocking off without worrying about the type of product that we envisage or that we have in mind. And should that be the case, we are then likely to have a society that will suffer leadership vacuum in future, because the ones that we are producing are most likely not to assist us in as far as leading the country is concerned. Look at the situation in education currently. Your best math and science teachers are mostly people that we got from outside countries. So that being the case, we should be working on closing that gap, ensuring that we are producing a teacher who can compete, who will have the determination to make sure that they bring this type of product out of the education system. But unfortunately, as you indicate, we are in a situation whereby the teacher just comes in, reports in and out. Any small matter that would want the teacher out of the classroom, the teacher grabs that as an opportunity to leave the school. So where are we going to have leadership in this country? Or is the private education sector perpetuating that mentality of producing the few that will continue to lead the majority? Hence, the government is over subsidizing the private system, the private education. Is it the idea to make sure that the learners of the connected, the learners of the well-off are channeled towards that direction so that they can come and lead, and then we maintain and keep that system of having the few continuing to have dominance over the many or over the majority and taking charge of leadership in the country? Is that the reason why we over subsidize or we subsidize extremely so the private education system to have the few keeping control over the majority?
Let us look at what happens. You have mentioned a very important subject like mathematics, where, for example, at grade 9, we have 300 learners who are all studying mathematics. But let us look at grade 12. We've got only 30 students studying mathematics. Was that our plan? Do we understand as a government what an effective school is? To me, an effective school is a school that starts grade 8 with 400 learners. And when we get to grade 12, we should have close to 400 learners who are studying, who are completing their matric. The minute you have less than 25% of those students, even less than 75% of those students going to grade 12, it means the school is not effective. Is the government doing anything? Are we going to be blaming the pandemic when we say, look at the universities? We have 75%, 80% of the medical students being people not from the Black communities. And we have less than 25% of people studying medicine who are from the Black communities. It is because the teachers that we have, they believe in a blown-up results, that they've got 90% pass rate, 100% pass rate. They force every learner to go and study maths lit. Whether the teacher does not care to make sure that the learner that has a challenge in mathematics is assisted. It is good that there are schools that have completed their syllabus. It shows the kind of leadership that we have there. And it is where the government should be going and say, how did you do this? How did you achieve that? I know of a school in Mukhale City in our area where it said we want to produce 100% pass rate in grade 12. And they were getting it for 10 years. And in those 10 years, getting 100% pass rate, they said, now we've got to improve on the quality. Before the quality, it was then making sure that learners get 100% subject pass. And that was achieved. And then it was every educator should look at producing at least 55% the average in a subject that you teach. But what do we get in our township schools? I know I was assisting at the school. This teacher got 100%, congrats to him. And I produced 100%. And he said, we're the same. I said, no, Minier, we're not the same. Look at your average. It is 41%. My average, and I'm not a qualified teacher, I got 68%. And they said, but that does not matter. It is the same thing. The teachers are not trained to appreciate these little things. But then we should be saying, not belabor the wrongs and the inefficiencies of the government in the past. What has the pandemic shown us? What do we learn from the impact that the pandemic has had on our education system? We mourn in Mukhale the passing of an educator, a maths educator who passed on yesterday, early in the morning. And we think of, are we going to have a teacher to replace him? Do we have maths teachers around here that can raise their hands immediately? Or are the grade 12s that you was teaching going to be suffering for the next 3 weeks? But I think it is for us then to be saying, what have we learned from the pandemic? What is it that should be done so that even if this pandemic was to continue up to 2022 as some project, our education system should not be affected? Would you have a plan for that as a former head of an institution? The pandemic has made us aware of very many things. And I don't want us to forget this point. Where do you think the children of the government leaders are attending? In the township schools? No, they are in those private schools. That is why I think the ordinary black person in the township that says, yeah, they don't close the private schools because that is where their children are. They're closing the public schools because that is where our children, those who don't have. And one parent was saying, look at their tummies. They say they stand for the poor and the hungry, but they've eaten all the food. That's why they have such big tummies. They did not share with the poor. But that is the kind of leadership that we have. That is the kind of leadership I will not be surprised next year when you go to municipal local elections. They'll be saying to the youth, we are the only government, remember we mentioned welfareism at the beginning. We're the only government that gave you 350. If you vote us into power, we will increase this. We're the only government that saw to it that the 340 child grant, we added an extra 700 rand. This, I would not be surprised if they use that because they want to project themselves as an efficient government, but they are not solving the problems. What do you think we have learned from this pandemic and what should we be doing?
Yeah. Look, like I said earlier, my take was more on the issue of private public. You basically did touch on that when you say mostly those who are aware that education is in crisis, they basically are the ones who are looking at an alternative channel to have their children educated, to send them to well-off schools. Probably to, like I said earlier, to keep on making sure that we cling on to control, we cling on to power. But what I want to indicate in relation to this is what happened to the caring nature of us as society, as a people, people who would go all out to fight and ensure that their children are able to get the best out of the waste that we are faced with. Look, there's very little improvement from where we were post 1994 to where we are currently. There's very little change there. But the difference in this regard is that then we knew that our children were our hope. We fought to make sure that we do not lose them. But now, come post 1994, we are in a situation whereby we have given up hope, whereby we don't care what's happening in school. So the crisis in education cannot primarily be attributed to the government role. Maybe there is also something that we neglect to do as society, that we do not do as the watchdog in the areas where we are living, to make sure that schools run. I agree that the pandemic affected education, and the pandemic make it difficult to have smooth running of schools as the situation is currently. But also, we seem to be lost as society in the process, because we do not do enough to make sure that we know what's going on in schools. Schools are mostly areas where we leave our kids to the control of the teachers, for teachers to look after them, not to teach them, because we seldom worry about what is happening in schools. Don't you think in a crisis time or period like the one that we are in currently, the parent must start to show up. The parent must start to be very, very initiative to make sure that we do not lose the black child. Because what worries in this sector is that those who are continuing to receive better education are those who are of the well-off, are those who are from the connected part of society. The majority of our children are basically developing into a lost generation, that when we are post this pandemic, we will not be having society that is going to rescue us from where we will be by that time. Because look, the idea for now is to truncate the school calendar, the academic year, that we are only teaching the basic, that we are dealing with only what matters. We basically are preparing them for exams, and preparing any learner for exams is not necessarily teaching the learner. We want a full product coming out of a school setup, out of a school situation. But the product that we are working on currently is the product that is going to leave us as a dependent society throughout. We will continue to envy efforts such as the one that is initiated by Oprah Winfrey, the school that he started there, but not everybody can be able to manage or can be accommodated in that type of a school. It is just a few girls who are able to go into that type of setup. The majority of the girls and the boys are left to the wolves outside. What is it that we have lost as society, particularly as black parents, that could have assisted in rescuing the situation or helping the schools to run during a crisis setup like this?
Thabo, it's just a huge dose of black consciousness. That's what we need. That's what our people need. That should be the drive that we have become like spectators in many cases of what is happening in front of us. We are not playing the game that we should be playing. You say the kind of an educator that will seem to be carrying. You've got to have been stung by the Biko bug for you to know what you've got to do. I don't want to be talking about us, the me, but I just want to give an example. The project that I'm running for the grades 8 and 9, we were done 2 months back with the syllabus for 6 months, for the 6 months that have passed. We wrote a fully fledged paper two papers in June from private schools, and the students did very well. You know that you found me marking yesterday. We have now completed the syllabus for the whole year. It is for us to say now which are the areas that the government has taken out. And once we in the Black Consciousness movement rise up to the occasion and do what used to be done in the early, from 72 up to 82, the projects that we used to run, the advice centers, stuff like that, that would bring the human face to teaching, to the public sector. People should know that when people come in here, they want to be helped and they've got to be helped. That is lacking in what we are doing. We have to go back to the drawing board and say, let, for example, AZAPO Limpopo to be running projects that are needed in that area, and we also do the same this side. I want us to commit ourselves in what we'll be doing henceforth. The system that we have, we cannot leave our parents into it. You are a former deputy principal. You are in the district, you are a district official in the Department of Education. Do the current principals allow parents that are vocal, that understand the South African Schools Act to participate in SGBs? No. They want people that they can run, people that they can control, parents who will come and just sign. And when you go to these meetings convened by these people, it is not to train the parents about involvement. It is more to tell them what they need to do. The teachers are used by the principal to say, go and get such a parent to come and stand for election and get people to vote for them. We will not win this battle unless we go there as a terrain that we need to be controlling, to give it a human face, to make sure that what we believe needs to come in can be performed. Matawa, I'm going to embarrass you a little by saying this. Look at what you did when you were an educator. There was a learner when I was assisting at your school who was very brilliant, but who had some challenges. What did you do? The Biko bug. You took that learner and you saw that learner through to school as your own child. I was very happy to learn that she now has so many degrees because of the kind of assistance you provided. I'm sorry to say this in a public forum like this, but that's the kind of parent, that is a kind of leader, the kind of educator we need. That will say, let me do something for my people, be it the next door neighbor, be the back opposite, or people in our street. But if we leave everything in the hands of this government, I'm telling you, we may as well pack and leave the country, because it is controlled by people that are moneyed, people with big spatches. And that is why you look at schools where children of the executive are attending. Can you think of one? Can you imagine one, even a councillor, whose child is attending in a township school? Yes, they might be there, but you will scratch your head until you are bald-headed before you can get one of them, because they are aware that the system that they are giving to our people is not all. And you look at the pandemic, what it has done, what is put to the fore. Look at how organized these other schools are. There are lines where the pupils and the learners have to stand. There is a procedure where they go through which they've got to go before they get into the schools. My son was telling me, he said, Papa, we won't win against this pandemic. I passed school A and school B. There are no people at the gate to check the temperatures, to get people to sign, to sanitize them. They are not there at the gates in our own areas. It is happening. And unless we stand up, we are going to continue blaming the pandemic. But we need to invade the SGBs to make sure that we get, or even just to have an NGO that will train parents on how to be effective governors in schools, even if we're not going there. We need to be doing some such. Otherwise, in the hands of these vultures, we are not going to be winning. I mean, the very food that is meant for the poor, a person getting over 100,000 rands per month steals those and go and sell them at a spaza shop. What kind of a government is this? It is not the pandemic, it is this. Because the other schools that are managed, even during this period of pandemic, they were able to provide the bare necessities that are required to, in a way, in code, to immune a person, I mean the kids from infection. But lo and behold, in our areas, I think more than 35 schools have already closed, opened and closed again because of the pandemic. We are exposed. The pandemic has shown that we have people in government who will still steal PPEs from a school of the poor, and they're going to be selling it somewhere else. They want to have big tummies too. How are we going to win this fight? It is easy. It is a mountain not insurmountable. That one we have climbed very huge mountains before, and we won. I don't see how we can fail this time. Your comment on that one, Meta. And I said, I want to challenge you that we should come up with a commitment that this is what we're going to do. The project that I'm running, we say, let's make it bigger. Let's make more like it.
Probably you know that the crisis that we find ourselves in, although the pandemic worsened it, is probably as a result of us having substituted the human factor with the beneficiary factor. You see, we have everybody in this situation. They want to see themselves getting something out of the situation as is. It may be a promotional post, it may be money, it may be any other factor, but we no longer have that learner who wants to excel, or that teacher who wants to excel, or that government official who wants to excel at service delivery. We have people who say it's now our time to eat, and we are in a sort of a feeding frenzy of some sort, whereby we have all come together to exploit the desperation of our people as we continue to enrich ourselves in the process.
Madam, this elitist attitude, we will not be able to solve it, but we can be able to make an impact by standing up and saying, this is what we are going to be doing. Comrade Ntwasa used to run that center in Dobsonville. He was running classes of very many kinds, sewing, academic, and so forth. We used to have this throughout the country and predominantly in Limpopo. What has happened to those? This government is not going to make us reach that land of milk and honey. It is just a pipe dream. They are there. They have arrived at that land of milk and honey, and they do not want us to share it with them. Matao, we are in a serious situation. The pandemic must have taught us a lot, and we should be saying, with Azania, after this pandemic, what is it that we are going to do? To be sitting like this and discussing and conversing and not come up with some resolutions, it is not going to help us a lot.
Maybe as we say, from our conversation, we are saying the situation is likely to stay with us for long, for many, many years to come, until we have a caring government in power, a government that will start to, or that will begin to take into consideration the needs of our children and our communities, and ensuring that we use education to take them out of the poverty depth that they find themselves in. I think that's how I would conclude what we have been talking about in relation to our exchanges matter.
Matawa, in conclusion, I will say, there isn't any call that is as easy as teaching, as long as it comes from the heart. Matawa gone into schools and said, I'm going to produce 91.5% pass rate. I'm going to produce 98% pass rate. I'm going to produce so many distinctions, and I've achieved that, and I never qualified as a teacher. It is just a commitment. It is from the heart. The bigger bag must have beaten you for you to say, I am going to make sure that these kids that I have, these kids that are my responsibilities, that are my charges, I've got to make sure that they reach dizzier heights than the ones that I've reached as an individual. And it is all upon us to do that. It can be done. It must be done.